Hello, my friends. I'm going to tell you a story about the small package tax. You're going to realize that it's much more serious than it seems. Let me tell you. In December 2001, China joined the WTO, the World Trade Organization. That was in December 2001. A big economic boom. Something extraordinary because the country previously had this reputation of being completely isolated and closed off from the world. So for a long time, for more than 10 years, this country is going to build knickknacks, cat toys, plastic objects, little lasers, keychains, things like that. So during that time, there was major deindustrialization in Europe and the United States, but at the same time, people thought it didn't matter. We were going to keep the top of the pyramid, keep the precious, important things where there is the greatest added value. And then to China, we would leave the trade of trinkets. They have very poorly paid workers, kept under a tight grip by the Chinese Communist Party. So in a way, everyone wins. That's it. China will continue this way until, and keep in mind, there have been technology transfers, know-how, all of that. And we're going to fast forward to 2015. In 2015, a plan was launched, which is absolutely extraordinary. And it didn't get the attention it deserved, but it was a complete break from the previous model. In 2015, China launched the plan called Made in China 2025. Yes, 2025. What does that mean? They gave themselves 10 years, which means the duration of 2 5-year plans. The Chinese economy is managed through 5-year plans. Each plan lasts 5 years. So they gave themselves the 13th and 14th 5-year plans to achieve excellence in 10 cutting-edge sectors. Notice we're shifting from trinkets to focusing on high-tech sectors, which is what this is about. Aerospace. You may have noticed that they launched the Comac C919, the airliner that is now operating on regular routes. It's just a matter of time before it starts competing with Boeing and Airbus. After that, well, there are sectors in there. There's medicine, advanced machine tools, so CNC machines and all that. They have targeted medical machines. I already said that. Agricultural machines, next generation agricultural machines. Technology, you see. And so China is going to launch this plan. So Europe expressed regret. They said, yes, we regret it, and so on. But Europe generally doesn't react to these things. It just accepts defeat right away on these matters. Anyway, if we go back to the mess of ecology, Europe actually benefits from losing economic wars because, quite simply, it wants to deindustrialize to lower its carbon footprint, which globally accounts for 5 or 5.9. But it wants to bring it down to 0 to see if that changes anything about the climate. And for that, it's very happy to lose all the economic wars. Okay, let's fast forward a little bit to 2015. Let's go to 2018. In 2018, China launched the 10,000 Little Giants initiative. The goal was to create, following the Made in China 2025 initiative, 10,000 SMEs that would take advantage of this initiative to position themselves against manufacturers. And here we'll see that Germany is being targeted. That means wherever you have a leading German manufacturer, China will set up dozens, if not hundreds, of competitors offering the same goods. Same performance, better service, lower price. So to undercut the German market. Of course, Germany and the European Union will simply lament. Now we get to 2019. 2019, for those who remember, there was this crisis about Huawei. Huawei is a big Chinese manufacturer. They make cell phones, computers, they make servers, they make network equipment like routers, switches, all that. And I remember at the time I was in tech, there was hysteria here in the United Kingdom, looking in the data center. We literally had to search with a flashlight in the data center to see if we hadn't left something somewhere, if there was a Huawei switch or something else. If there was, we had to unplug it and immediately toss it in the electronic waste bin. Of course, it was about protecting Apple. It was about protecting Apple because today, if you look at Huawei products, they're practically in the same price range and the same level of quality as Apple products. You'll find items like they have their system that looks like a MacBook, but it's lighter, very powerful, very fast, and it's sold in the same price range. They no longer sell trinkets. It's really something very advanced and very expensive. Well, okay. Now let's continue. The United States is increasingly realizing the danger. They realize that the 10,000 Little Giants initiative, the initiative, because 10,000 Little Giants, I can tell you, in a few years, within a few years, they had already gone past their 10,000 target and reached 14,000. The last time I checked, they were at 14,000. Today, they must have gone much higher. Yeah. I'm going to write down a few other dates. 2020. In 2020, the United States sanctioned SMIC. SMIC is a Chinese semiconductor manufacturer. SMIC, that's why it's blocked, because it had the ability, and still does by the way, to give Intel and AMD a run for their money. That means to give Intel, AMD, and even Motorola and others a run for their money. That means it's capable of making very fast, very powerful microprocessors, flooding the market at rock bottom prices. Then those two American companies will no longer exist. That was 2020. Then we'll move on to some other, maybe less notable sanctions. We're going to go to 2023. In 2023, the United States bans the export of H800 type chips to China. It's simply to hold them back on the artificial intelligence front, but it's also to protect NVIDIA, because NVIDIA and other companies, even Akamai, have a big impact on American indexes, on the S&P 500, on the NASDAQ, and others. So we don't want these companies to be put on the ropes by China. So it's going to be necessary to protect American technology and, among other things, specifically ban the export of American technologies to China. And all of this is to prevent them from being copied, taken apart, and then replicated. All right, let's continue. In 2024, another American sanction will be imposed, and this time what we call HBM will be banned. HBM is high bandwidth memory. And why are the United States doing this? Because these memories allow training artificial intelligence models. So when you're like the psychos in China, for example, because you have LLMs, the artificial intelligence, well, you have graphics cards with very powerful chips, from NVIDIA typically, that are going to process a huge amount of data. But then be careful, if you don't have memory that can handle that data, well, there's no point in having fast graphics cards, if the memory can't keep up. So there are memories called HBM, they're faster than DDR and all that. It's another extremely powerful technology. And now their trade is banned in China. Why? Because we want to protect Claude, we want to protect ChatGPT or OpenAI, we want to protect Gemini, etc. We don't want China to have access to that, you see. So right now I've been laying out for you a kind of shadow war. Actually, it's not even in the shadows, it's an open war. You can tell there are no missiles. Speaking of missiles, if you see that, for example, in 2026, Calais, you could almost say we're practically in a federalized Europe today, almost. The Minister of Foreign Affairs of the European Union, who said that China was a cancer and that it needed chemotherapy. Just to tell you why China is attacking Europe economically, you need to know that. Because, look, even if afterwards the media tried to downplay it by saying, yes, it was taken out of context, she talked about cancer and chemo, then she talked about China, etc. It was all mixed together, and all that, I get it. But the problem is, when you're doing diplomacy at that level, when you use the name of a country like China or others in the same context, and you talk about cancer and chemotherapy, I mean, that's called a casus belli, diplomatically speaking. It's an act of aggression. It means if China had responded with a missile, many people would have considered that normal. I mean, you say that a country, you call it a cancer and you want to give it chemo, you want to treat it with chemo, it's going to treat you with chemo way before you do, you see. Especially since Europe does have a certain history, when you start treating people like that, you have to know that they might take it literally. So Europe has also stated several times that it wants to dismantle Russia into very small, insignificant states and all that, ones that can be controlled and everything. And that the next one on the list is China. China was not founded with, in the last few decades through some coal and steel union, China, after all, that's 3,000 years of documented history. So China, if we start picking a fight with China, saying we want to dismantle it, it's a cancer, we're going to treat it with chemo and all that, China has the means to make sure that Europe no longer exists, really, So, and without firing a single shot, they're very powerful. Those guys, they don't need to threaten or anything. They'll just act right away. So that's what's happening. You can clearly see there's this war. And then, well, Europe is happy to lose the economic war. Let's not kid ourselves. It leads to decarbonization. China acts as a decarbonization agent for the European economy. That means it drives businesses under, it wipes out industries, and then Europe is very happy to say there's less carbon. All right, I told you, Europe accounts for 5.9% of global carbon. They'd like to go to zero to see if it affects the climate. All right, so we get to 2026. And France joins this economic war by saying, well, we're going to impose the small parcel tax. All right, while people, men are talking about H800 chips and HBM, like I told you, they're discussing about planes, about engines, about satellites, about high-speed trains and so on. France shows up. You really feel like it's someone arriving at the Battle of Stalingrad with a plastic gun. A water gun, and he starts shooting like this with water. That's the impression it gives. They show up in 2026, while in this battle, those 2 5-year plans are already over. China managed to plan ahead. So they said by 2025, we need to master 10 technologies. Well, they've mastered them. You see, today, the Chinese domestic market gets, for example, 99% of its precision machine tools locally instead of importing them from Germany. Well, today, we don't need Germany anymore. Now we make them locally. We even export them. They've even managed to get the Russian market and other markets, you see. That's it. 2025, they've already achieved their goal. So now we'll see what they'll do next. And meanwhile, you have Macron's France showing up. They have little packages. We'll have to take a look. You have some panties. You have a jersey thong. You have a little trinket. You have the teenager who brings back resistors for electronics. Count them. Go ahead. Let's count them. Okay, there's 1, 2, 3. 3 resistors. 4, 5. What's this? That's a fuse. That's wire. That's soldering wire. You see the pathetic stuff, right? You see the pitiful level this battle is being fought at the level of Europe and at the level of France. So there you go. It's, but just, you see the small parcel tax, you realize that, honestly, this is the level they're at today. It's gutter level, literally. It's at that level. It's ridiculous and grotesque, but that's how it is. They sank Vatry Airport with that because, quite simply, you need to know one thing. Today, logistics chains are literally big screens with guys behind them and software and all that. Then they can just click, draw a line. And behind that, when they draw a line, suddenly you have a ship somewhere in the Atlantic, in the Pacific, in the Indian Ocean. And suddenly, well, a little printer. Okay, we're going to change course. It will change course and head to another port. You can have a cargo ship that's being loaded, a plane. We tell the captain, before you leave, there's a change. You're not going to the airport, you'll go to that one instead. It's that quick, we can even update them in flight. You see what I mean? We're not in the 1700s. We can't just say, well, the stagecoach passes through here. They have no choice. It's the only road. There's the castle, there's the hill, there's the plain. They have to go through here. We'll wait for them. We'll rob them. That's all over. That's finished. I'll tell you something in defense of the Chinese. They're not the ones who invented globalization. Glorious globalization was invented by the West, by the United States, by Europe, and so on. And back then, when we spoke out against globalization, people thought we were terrible conspiracy theorists. They thought we were awful nationalists. We were called far right. We were called all sorts of names. We had been saying for a long time that globalization would turn against its creators. Well, here we are today. So now, those who used to threaten countries with the IMF and others, the World Bank and all that, to make them open their borders, to allow foreign companies to set up, to implement what they call the market economy. Well, it's those same countries today that are putting up tariffs, putting up customs barriers. You see, they change the rules as it suits them, When Europe was exporting and all that, well, customs barriers were considered a crime. You see, right, that was considered a major crime to put up a customs barrier. They lifted the customs barrier under threat while the United States went further. They declare wars and they organize color revolutions. They overthrow regimes so their companies can enter a country. And today, well, nobody wants their companies anymore, and there are others who replace them at a moment's notice. Well, there you go. It's the student who has surpassed the master. You see what I mean? It's China. It's not this country. You can say whatever you want about the country. That country, it's not the one that invented capitalism, let alone cutthroat capitalism, but now they've learned it. But they've learned it. And now they're using the same recipe that was invented by the Westerners. They're making them eat it, except now it's even spicier than what they made in the beginning. That's it. So yeah, that's the situation. I just wanted to tell you, that's enough. It's impossible to untangle. It's impossible to untangle. Actually, I'll tell you, I'm starting today. Here's my analysis and perspective. I think that today, sovereignty, because I learned it a bit the hard way with Brexit. I'll tell you why. Because 10 years ago, I thought sovereignty was political sovereignty. Today, I realize that you can't have political sovereignty if you don't have economic sovereignty. That economic sovereignty is the most important. Once you have your economic sovereignty, once you are an economic power, then political and geostrategic power and all that will come on its own. It comes on its own. It's a bonus. You don't even need to do anything for it to happen. But if you are a deindustrialized, indebted country with 25% of your population, those are real numbers. Here lives below the poverty line. And millions of young people are depressed. They don't have a future. And then you go shouting from the rooftops, yes, we're sovereign. But sovereign of what? What are you sovereign of? It's like a homeless person saying, here, I'm sovereign over this piece of sidewalk, I'm sovereign over this shopping cart, full of trash. You see, I'm sovereign over this sleeping bag that my father had when he was 15, that's all worn out and I sleep in it. You see what I mean? I'm sovereign over that. Okay, you're not sovereign over anything at all. You're sovereign over ruins. Okay, you're going to be sovereign over ruins? Yes. But real sovereignty is expressed on the economic level. That means industries that generate output, industries that hire on a massive scale, companies that make money, that handle trillions, that people buy from far away. A territory that attracts people, investors, creators who come to you to invest, to create, to grow, to build on your economy, and then go far. That's when you become a real force. And that's when people respect you no matter what. Because today, what people respect is money. It's not flags. It's not flags. You don't want to just raise a flag and say, yeah, this is my flag. We died for this flag. Nobody cares about that anymore. That's outdated. That's from the 1900s. You're stuck in the last century. Come into the present. Today, what people respect is economic power. That's real sovereignty. That's it. Anyway, thank you, my friends. Thank you for listening to this video up to this point, and I'll see you in the next one. And then I wanted to tell you that I finished my book. Lately, you haven't seen me much. I'll tell you why. Because I was finishing the book Astrology, the sequel. Because since Astrology doesn't stop, well, I had to make a sequel to the bestseller Astrology. So it's not a new edition of Astrology. No, it's just a sequel, that's all. By the way, I can even tell you that it's coming out soon during the month of, I hope during the month of July, I hope by the end of July. But I can tell you that it's even a bit bigger than the first one. So many cases are piling up, so much horror continues, fraudulent loopholes, the plundering of subsidies, embezzlement, ideology, all of that. There is so much. And honestly, I can tell you, at some point, I had to stop. Because if I hadn't stopped, I would have ended up with a book twice as big as what I wanted. All right, so there you go. Thank you, my friends. See you in the next one. See you very soon.